And now, CBS6 Rewind Revisited with Liz Bishop.
I have a lot of fond memories about Schenectady.
I just enjoy wrestling.
I would rather write.
I love to work with people.
I want the championship so bad.
I'm an illustrator. I like to be innovative.
I love Saratoga.
Never give up.
My resignation will be effective in 14 days.
We all have stories to tell. Some are grand and inspiring, others are tragic. They can remind us of just how fragile human existence can be, or how a single heroic act can change dozens of lives.
In the course of a lifetime of living and working here in the capital region, I've been both narrator and audience for thousands of your stories. Stories that have stayed with me for decades.
Some have been moving, some have been uplifting, and others have been downright shocking. And as you'll find out tonight, the people, places, circumstances, and outcomes we've encountered together are often surprising and always worth a second look.
For the last several months, I've buried myself here in the CBS6 archives, revisiting some of those life-changing moments from years past. Tonight, we take a look back in time together on CBS6 Rewind Revisited.
Here's Liz Bishop with the Great Mechanicville Car Con of 1979.
43 years ago, a stranger arrived here in the city of Mechanicville, offering to buy everyone he met a brand new car. Hundreds of people were all set to kick the tires, but as you're about to see, there was just one catch.
It's almost like the start of a bad joke. A man walks into a car dealership.
Offering 1,000 people automobiles.
The setup was simple.
He wasn't asking for money from the people up front.
So you just knew the punchline was going to be good.
The area went wild.
Well, why not believe it?
I was going to get a new car. You were going to get a new car.
What harm is there in just hoping?
But he had also at one time promised me a boat.
But in the end, the joke was on the people of Mechanicville waiting for those new wheels.
Last night, the money was supposed to be flown in. It wasn't flown in. Today, it isn't here yet.
A scam that left everyone involved scratching their heads.
He told me to come down here. I was supposed to get a car.
I took a chance like everybody else. I didn't invest no money.
This was more than idle talk. There were actual contracts drawn up. 183 to be exact.
I could have had anything I wanted.
And what'd you buy?
An LTD wagon.
He told you not to say a word? When did he tell you this?
Bob John Ray's bizarre offer found hundreds of people waiting for a set of keys with their hands out, and the press hot on his heels.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it in my life.
So investigate they did, running down the 5 W's at every turn.
We can't get involved in this yet. Come in without the camera and I'll explain it to you.
To the dismay of the car dealership.
Can we come in?
Without the camera and microphone and I'll explain it to you.
Why won't you explain it?
Because he said it.
He said what?
Close the door.
So let's just rewind to how Bob John Ray drove a whole city down a detour to disappointment.
This is about controlling and manipulating other people.
The who was obvious. An unassuming-looking guy with 3 first names and no apparent ties to Mechanicville.
We had no background on. There was no way of checking on him.
The where was pretty straightforward. Here at the Ford dealership, then owned by Jack Byrne, who had never met Bob John Ray before he showed up in Mechanicville. Jack stood to make a lot of money if this deal went through, so he kept his fingers crossed.
He was here about 5 minutes ago, right? And he said that he was back to reassure us that there wasn't a hoax.
If the why had no clear answer, the when was equally cloudy.
He said, just have faith, the money's coming. And that's what he's been telling us all along, but I think everybody here and all the people that are involved in this are just losing a lot of faith in what he said.
And in the end, what was missing was the cash.
Let's see the money.
He said, the money's coming.
I'm waiting for 3 days now. I need the money.
Do you actually have the money?
Yes, sir.
Where's it coming from?
It'll be in any time, sir.
How?
My plane tonight is arriving. Should be here very shortly.
Nothing camera shy about this Canadian stranger who took Mechanicville by storm.
I don't mean to blow their minds. The only thing I wanted them to do is where they could enjoy something that somebody wants to reach out and give them something, not ask anything back in return.
There were those who called it an opportunity to put Mechanicville on the map.
Even if it does turn out to be a hoax, in some ways at least people had a little brightened day. They had something to talk about.
While others say this was a dirty deed.
Getting people's hopes up and then dash their hopes. That's not just manipulative, that's cruel.
But you can't pick the car up today unless he pays for it.
He got pleasure out of creating harm or pain in others.
A man long on sentiment, but short on specifics.
No, sir, that I'm not going to say, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to say, thank you.
To all appearances, Bob John Ray never got anything out of the hoax except a free train ride out of town, where reports say he tried to drive one last hard bargain.
He was talking to the conductor.
What did he tell the conductor?
I guess if he could sit up front with him in the engine compartment, he'd buy him a new Cadillac.
The salesman, who stood to make a big commission if the deal went through, did not want to go on camera, but he told me that 183 contracts were drawn up. And he said if those deals had gone through, this would have made the Guinness Book of World Records as the biggest single new car sales deal.
CBS6 Rewind Revisited continues with the day the drug war exploded in our backyard.
The New York State Police have investigated some very big cases, but few are probably as bizarre as the one that you could say blew up on them in 1985. That's when a quiet Montgomery County farm began producing a most unusual bumper crop that out of the blue made a lot of noise in the middle of the night. There's nothing more peaceful than a rural stretch of farmland, but 37 years ago, this spot in Montgomery County exploded into the headlines.
A dangerous cash crop wasn't being planted in the soil. It was being manufactured in a lab. Rewind to 1984. A buyer for this 258-acre property on the market appears out of nowhere, saying he wants to start a horse farm. His agent tries to pay the $110,000 asking price with an airline bag filled with small bills. The owner refuses, and eventually a cashier's check and the farm change hands. But instead of a horse farm, the new owner, a notorious Colombian drug lord, set up in our backyard what turned out to be the largest cocaine processing lab in the country.
There was 90 pounds of cocaine right there at that one little place.
Why did no one know what was going on here?
Well, they posted a lot of no trespassing signs, a lot of beware of dog signs, and so we acknowledged their rights.
But the whole world would soon find out when on April 12, 1985, an explosion blew 2 buildings on the property to smithereens.
We did not know about that lab until the fire department arrived and started calling people saying, you better get somebody out here.
The smell of chemicals was everywhere.
It looks like we have a bomb factory. And we got very scared at that time.
Scared with good reason. 235 barrels of highly toxic and flammable chemicals miraculously escaped the flames.
We didn't want to ask too many questions.
Why not?
Well, you never know.
Did you see anything suspicious going on?
None whatsoever.
Officials say sloppy work coupled with faulty wiring caused the explosion that blew apart the lab and in the process blew the lid off the illicit drug operation. Retired state police and DEA official Dave Lutweiler spent years working the Colombian connection to this area.
DEA was aware that something was going on in upstate New York.
Why here? Because of a crackdown on exporting ether and other drug-making chemicals into this country.
In 1985, a 55-gallon drum of ether that would cost you $400 in the United States would cost you $10,000 in Colombia.
So the drug lords went where ingredients were cheap and a ready transport route existed, here to upstate New York.
A trooper would stop a car at 2 o'clock in the morning from the Bronx or Queens. They had ether bottles empty in the back of the car.
With ether affordable and available, the Colombians brought in 2 duplexes, the gallons of chemicals, and a dozen or so laborers, and avoided any contact with the community.
Get to a rural area. Get to an area where the potential of people smelling the chemicals wouldn't be that great.
By all accounts, the fire in the lab was an accident.
Apparently, it was an electrical fire of some type in the lab where they were cooking the material. They apparently panicked, and they ran.
And if the explosion was unexpected, so were the arrests resulting from it.
There was a Montgomery County Sheriff's deputy found 3 of them walking down a road. You know, the cocaine all over the whole. They were arrested.
Were they burned?
No, I don't think they were. I don't think they were burned. I think they had a lot of residue on them.
The 3 would eventually go on trial for immigration violations. Did Minden have an effect on the drug trade?
It might have worked for a while, but it blew up on them.
Authorities say the Minden farm alone could have produced more than $700 million worth of cocaine. It took years to reclaim the soil from all the chemicals that were spilled into it from the fire.
CBS6 Rewind Revisited will return in a moment with the meteoric rise and unexpected demise of a major area toy maker. And now, back to CBS6 Rewind Revisited with Liz Bishop.
It's your new baby sister. She looks just like you.
New Cabbage Patch Kids babies. Now you can adopt your very own.
This is your very own baby to love.
Remember those iconic 80s superstars? Cabbage Patch Kid dolls were the hottest selling toys in U.S. history in 1985, with more than $600 million in sales. And they were manufactured right here at the old Coleco plant in Amsterdam. But just like any much-loved plaything, the Cabbage Patch Kid craze would eventually fall apart. And when it did, it ripped thousands of jobs and millions of dollars out of the local economy. What went wrong? You're about to find out. A paint chip sign on the side of a sad-looking concrete wall. All that's left of one of the most successful toy businesses in the world. But before flaming out, Coleco's 4 Capital Region factories worked at a furious pace under intense company pressure to meet customers' demands.
They would call you on the intercom system every hour and want to know your production for that hour.
Gary Locatelli, former production supervisor.
You had to put out 150 of those per hour.
For a brief moment in time, this small company in the Mohawk Valley was on top of the world, employing thousands to work in a maze of interconnected buildings. But today, a drive through the Coleco complex is a trip through a ghost town. How did their story go so wrong? You have to rewind back to the early 60s to understand how the Connecticut Leather Company hit the big time. It started with a new name, Coleco. The company diversified and began making above-ground pools and eventually toys like Smurfs, Rambo dolls, and Big Wheels bikes. But it was a huggable little doll with painted eyes and big dimples introduced at the New York Toy Show in 1983 that skyrocketed Coleco to the top of the toy world. Within a year, the demand for the Cabbage Patch Kid doll would become so great that parents threw punches in store aisles to secure one.
These really aren't dolls at all. They're kids who are adopted.
And when video games became a national obsession, Coleco was right there, securing the exclusive rights to manufacture Donkey Kong. The output locally was blistering.
One thing I have left from my Coleco days is a stopwatch. They only had maybe 2 seconds to put in the 2 screws. And if somebody was taking 4 seconds, then I either had to tell them to speed it up or I had to replace them with another person.
And the pace never slowed. The company even created its own console, the $189 Coleco Vision.
It's probably be the #1 toy of the year.
The Amsterdam factory turned out more than 1 million in 1982 and averaged 9,600 ColecoVision games a day.
It was just floor to floor of electronics, people assembling the games, and it was just a madhouse.
Meanwhile, that little doll with its own birth certificate sold 20 million in 1984. But bad company decisions and changing tastes were the beginning of the end.
The Powerpuff Girls, which is based on Japanese anime. Of course, the Beanie Babies became very popular too and kind of pushed the market for Cabbage Patch Kid dolls out of the way.
Computers muscled their way into the American consciousness, and Coleco rushed in while refusing to outsource.
We can do it cheaper in Amsterdam, New York.
The company became a victim of its own ambition. In 1983, Coleco introduced the $600 Atom computer before an actual working model ever materialized.
By the end of the year, we will produce between 125,000 and 140,000 units of Atom.
Advanced sales were delayed for months on end, and those who did get one most often found it defective. That led to the shutdown of the second and third shifts in Amsterdam, and by 1985, Coleco dropped its own Atom bomb. It was done making the Atom computer. For 4 of the next 5 years, Coleco would bleed money and begin outsourcing local jobs overseas. The Amsterdam and Mayfield plants were closed.
They just came up to us and told us that we were going to be laid off.
They just gave me my check, gave me a little thing and said goodbye.
Hopes remained high, though, that this critical business would not die.
They are going to come back. They're not dead.
But in the end, there was no coming back for Coleco. What was the economic driver in the Mohawk Valley sputtered to a stop. And with that, the dream was over. By 1989, the swimming pool business had been sold to a company in Canada, and Hasbro had bought Coleco.
Now, CBS6 Rewind Revisited takes you to a Lake George landmark for a story of paradise lost, paradise regained.
Thomas Jefferson once said of Lake George that it was without comparison the most beautiful water he had ever seen. But He never got to stay here at the 5-star Sagamore Resort. It is without doubt the standard for luxury and play in the Adirondacks. But there was a time when it was in such disrepair that the state shut it down for being unsafe. An endless expanse of water, majestic mountains, beautiful buildings, groomed grounds, and plentiful play areas. The Sagamore Resort is a vacationer's dream. Just try to picture Lake George without it. But it turns out you almost did. Tonight's CBS6 Rewind takes you back 40 years to a make-or-break moment when a failing Sagamore Resort could have faded into the past. In 1883, a handful of Philadelphia millionaires commiserated over drinks about how Lake George's popularity had ruined their idyllic playground.
The gentlemen that used to own a lot of the cottages along Millionaires Row that came up from the city were commiserating at the bar one day about their homes getting overrun by friends and family.
A very 1% problem with an obvious solution. They bought Green Island for $30,000, and a year later, the Sagamore was born. Rooms went for the outrageous sum of $4 a day. It was an instant hit with tourists. The guests themselves arrived by steamship.
They would unload them with their trunks and women in full garb because they would stay for the season.
There have been fires and structural issues, a Great Depression, and 2 world wars along the way, but nothing could fell this great pillar of the Adirondacks. Or so it seemed. Rewind to 1981. A decidedly tired-looking castle for the Queen of American Lakes pulled up at Strawbridge. For 4 years, arguably the greatest piece of property in the Adirondacks was off-limits to guests. The Sagamore Hotel shut down in large part because it could not meet the state's new fire prevention standards.
I think the ownership at the time, back in the 70s, Lou Brandt, I think he was just getting to the end of his tenure with the property and didn't have the resources to continue to upgrade and put money into the property.
Lou Brandt had only one choice, to sell. And a year later, Norman Woljan put his considerable hotel experience to work, investing $70 million in the purchase and renewal of the Grand Dame of the lake.
There was a hole in Bolton Landing, so to speak. And when it came back, it was like, wow, we're whole again.
In 1984, local leaders were over the moon about the plans for Sagamore's rebirth.
I think it'll have a spin-off throughout the whole North Country here.
There will be conventions, year-round conventions.
That could bring in thousands of people.
Could bring in thousands of people, yes.
And much like a famous movie, once they rebuilt it, they did come.
Absolutely. I mean, PepsiCo, TGI Fridays, restaurants, a big annual conference, the Albany market, most definitely it did.
It took 5 years, $70 million, and some concessions from the community. But the Queen had her crown jewel back.
It was originally just a hotel, but we added condominiums and a conference center and the golf course. So we brought it from, a summer resort to a season, full-service, year-round resort.
Since then, another major renovation came in 2008 when an outdoor pool was added, along with other guest requests like outdoor patios off some of the 390 rooms on the property, as well as waterfront dining. So with the Sagamore cruising along, the CBS6 Rewind turns another page on a colorful Capital Region past. Like beautiful Lake George, the Sagamore Resort today is here for the long haul. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, and year after year it wins Reader's Choice Awards in national magazines.
CBS6 Rewind Revisited will return in a moment with a local sports match that ignited a firestorm seen across the country. And now, back to CBS6 Rewind Revisited with Liz Bishop.
Something that happened here at Albany's Bleecker Stadium caused the sport of rugby to dominate not just the sports pages, but the front pages of newspapers all around the world. It had nothing to do with the rough and tumble nature of the sport, and everything to do with an international battle over a really ugly political policy.
Stare long enough at this empty field and you can almost see the shadows of the epic battle played out here 41 years ago. There's no historical marker to commemorate the moment because some still wish it never happened. Rewind to 1981, the year the sport of rugby became a national sensation for all the wrong reasons.
You've got a team that's
entirely white, with the exception of one player.
A government-sponsored form of racism known as apartheid had turned the world champion South African Springboks into a worldwide pariah. The players took a different view.
Rugby is played for sportsmanship and sportsmanship only, with no political motivations whatsoever.
And yet, despite an international outcry, the Springboks embarked on a U.S. tour that would take them to the unlikeliest of places, Albany, New York. Tom Selfridge was the rugby union official who brought the team here.
We're opposed to apartheid. The groups that have come here are not opposed to rugby. So it's just a matter of sorting out different issues and philosophies.
For thousands of local protesters, the idea that the capital region would welcome a national team from South Africa to play rugby and, by extension, promote their state-sponsored racism was unthinkable.
The message is clear. It's Springboks go home. Racism isn't welcome in Albany.
That vehement community reaction was not the only battle brewing. Orestes Corning had been the iron-fisted mayor of Albany for 40 years. He insisted that freedom of expression demanded that the game had to be played, even though
there's no possible guarantee that people will not cause trouble. That's what is the case with all violence.
Hugh Carey was nearing the end of his second term as governor. He put his foot down.
I, as an American citizen, simply can't understand what the team is doing here. I don't know how they got visas. I hope the match doesn't take place.
Carey issued an executive order canceling the game, but ultimately a terse one-word ruling from the Supreme Court decided it. Carey's executive order was denied.
My position never wavered. Against probably I'm sure, the most intense pressure I ever had in almost 40 years as mayor.
The legal victory sent civil rights advocates into overdrive.
Just as we're trying to get rid of Jim Crow in this country, South Africa has got to get rid of apartheid.
That was iconic folk singer Pete Seeger leading one of the protests. He would be one of thousands to take a stand.
The demonstration is on, and that we will stop the apartheid rugby tour. It will be stopped.
That kind of rhetoric sent waves of alarm to the capital city.
You're opening the newspaper and you're reading, oh, the American Nazi Party is going to show up. That's going to scare a lot of people.
The fear was well-founded. The night before the game, a bomb threat was called into a local radio station. 20 minutes later, an explosion shattered 3 downtown Schenectady businesses, including the Eastern Rugby Union offices. The culprit was never found.
We have no idea at this time.
To what extent is the damage inside?
It's extensive.
But in the end, it was neither that violent act, nor the mayor, nor the governor, nor federal judges, not even the Supreme Court, that had the final say in how it all turned out. It was the weather.
Hell no to apartheid! Hell no to racism!
2,000 protesters braved a steady downpour to walk from the state capitol to Albany's Bleecker Stadium to make their outrage known. On the field, the world's best team played like the champions they were, drubbing the Eastern Rugby Union 40-0. No one was hurt, the demonstrators had made their point peacefully, and a constitutional protection was upheld. There was just one thing. A second game was scheduled between the same 2 teams. Fearing he would not be able to stem the violence a second time, Selfridge quietly called an end around, changing the day, time, and location of the game.
This overgrown polo field in Glenville was where it all played out in the end. I'm back here for the first time since reporting from the sidelines.
For reasons of security, the only people that were informed that the game would be played this afternoon were the state police.
The Springboks beat the U.S. Eagles 38-7 in a game that still managed to be a record setter.
The 20 or so people that showed up at the game are officially the fewest number of people to officially witness an international rugby competition.
6 years later, South Africa was banned from international competition for apartheid. By 1993, the country's racist policy was over. But it would be 37 years before the Boks came back to the United States to play Wales in a matchup in Washington, D.C.
That's it for CBS6 Rewind Revisited. But before we go,
we hope you've enjoyed this look back at our headline-grabbing stories from the past. It's just a small sampling of the stories waiting for a retelling here in the CBS6 archives. And we've already begun to dig deep for more, so stay with us for more surprises on CBS6 Rewind. I'm Liz Bishop. Thanks for joining us.